Welcome to the Canadian Expat Tax Tuesday. As a Canadian living abroad, what are your tax obligations in Canada? The question can be extremely complex. In this series, every Tuesday night, we take questions that subscribers to the Canadian Expat have asked and present them to the tax professionals of Trowbridge. Once again, a warm welcome to Ernie Nagratha, one of the partners with Trowbridge. Ernie, welcome back.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me.
It's truly a pleasure to have you back here. We're excited about this. We've got another couple of questions from our subscribers. Let's just jump right into it.
Sounds good.
This individual, the subscriber, asked, who do I pay taxes to if I work online as a sole proprietor and receive income from multiple different countries?
Okay, excellent question. Two parts to this answer. Let me answer it from the perspective of an individual living and working in Canada first, and then an individual living and working abroad, because then it'll give both sides of the story. So let's say, and let's just use me as an example, let's say I was a sole proprietor living and working in Toronto, and I have clients around the world, which I do, and I'm providing those services. If I'm in essence what we call exporting the service. So if a person is, say, in Ecuador, and they've asked me to provide some consulting advice, and I charge them an invoice, I send them that invoice. I can send it electronically, and because I'm exporting the service, there wouldn't be any PST, HST, any sort of tax on that from a sales tax perspective. They would then pay that invoice, and I would pay taxes in Canada. So I'm not subject to tax in any of those other countries because I'm not providing the service in those countries. I'm physically providing the service from Canada. Flip side, if I went to that country to provide the service, so let's say I flew over to Ecuador and consulted with my client in person there, then I've got to look to determine whether I have any taxes due in Ecuador because I'm physically providing the service. Now, on the other side of the story, let's say I live and work in another country. I'll just make this up. I live and work in Singapore, and I'm providing services. I'm a Canadian in Singapore providing services to clients around the world, in addition to, let's say, clients in Canada. Then I would be subject to tax only in Singapore. Canada would not be concerned about me. I'm exporting the service out into Canada or those other countries virtually, in essence, through phone or Skype or Zoom or electronically. And so then I'm only worried about the country that I'm providing the service in, and that's Singapore. If I fly to Canada and I provide the service here, then yes, then we have to look at potential taxation in Canada, depending on what the Canada-Singapore Treaty says about that. So again, always generally looking at where the individual is physically located when they're providing that service.
Very interesting. All right, question number 2. Once I've been declared a non-resident in Canada for taxation purposes, can that be revoked if I move to another country? And specifically, this individual asked the question, it looks like they're retiring. If they move to a country that has a favorable tax situation, like maybe a zero tax rate, do they have to report that to CRA? And if they do, will that change their income tax relationship with Canada? They've said that they're receiving a Government of Canada pension, so they are receiving some income.
Okay, so let me answer both pieces of that question. So the first is, so let's say they move from they've already become non-residents. They will move from one country to another. Let me make a fictitious example. Let's pretend they lived in the UK, and the UK does have income tax. They became a non-resident. They're living, working, all their day-to-day activities are done in the UK, and they one day decide to move to a tax-free jurisdiction, and let's say it was the Cayman Islands. So they moved to Grand Cayman, where there is no personal taxation. There's no impact to Canada. They can, once they establish non-residency with Canada, and they decide to go from place to place around the world, as long as they're not entering Canada or becoming a resident again in Canada or establishing ties in Canada, there's no impact to Canada and there's no communication that's required to Canada. That's now then between themselves and the country that they're living in. Now, a pension is an excellent question because Canada has signed, as we know, bilateral tax agreements with various countries around the world. And each of those countries have a withholding tax rate on different sources of income, pensions being one of them. So for example, the base rate, so for a non-treaty country, the withholding rate in Canada for a pension would usually be 25%. And if you go to a country that has negotiated a lower rate, typically we would see a rate of around 15% as an example. So you could be in a situation where if you move to another country, you then need to notify the Canada Revenue Agency of your new country of residence so that they withhold at the correct rate. You've got to be careful because let's say you're in a country that was at a 15% withholding rate, and you then move to another country that's at a 25% withholding rate, either based on the treaty or based on the base rate with Canada, then you could be in a situation where you're now paying, in my example, 10% more tax. If you didn't notify the Canada Revenue Agency, then you could be liable for back taxes for that extra 10%. So something to keep in mind. We've seen it happen before, many times, unfortunately, with clients. Sometimes on the favorable end, where they go to a country with a lower rate and they didn't know, and now they get some refund, but it's something to be aware of.
Good to know. Ernie, once again, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Look forward to next week.
Thank you.
This is an ongoing project. For future videos, please feel free to submit your questions to us and Trowbridge by leaving a comment below. If you've submitted a question that was not answered here, there's probably a reason for that and most likely requires a full consultation. A link to Trowbridge's website is in the description, so please contact them directly. They'd love to assist. Once again, to make sure that you know when we upload a new video, hit the subscribe button and the little bell so that you get notifications. It will benefit the channel and ensure that we're able to continue doing this if you hit the like button. Thanks for watching.